All right, JJ, video response to your second video called Human Bonding and Atheists. Yeah. I finally contextualized what I was saying before. I was asking in an earlier video whether simply giving people freedoms, creating a space, giving freedoms, whether that is enough or whether there needs to be a positive quality. And I think that the answer would then be the virtues. Just telling people, okay, you're free, you have certain rights, freedom of speech, et cetera, et cetera. You have these rights. Then the trust is that people will, given the freedom, society will just evolve in a positive form. But I think what I prefer to see is the positive values of virtues, and then cultivating that. And I do think they have to be cultivated. Actually, it's a good phrase to use, a traditional phrase to use, but I think it's a good one. So I think that just creating the space, the free space, is maybe not enough. Democracy. Democracy. I touched on the structure of the U.S. government, with a Congress and a Senate and an executive branch and a legislative, a judicial branch, and there's two houses in the legislative branch, blah, blah, blah. It being based on Polybius, who I think originally, the theory originally comes from Aristotle, that when he studied, or whoever wrote there, studied government, they found that monarchy always eventually devolved into tyranny. You always ended up with a tyrant eventually in a monastic dynasty. A small group, an aristocracy, always eventually degenerated into an oligarchy, a small number of people just governing for their own benefit. And then democracy, rule of the people, I guess you say one person, one vote, could devolve, or eventually would devolve, into mob rule. And so the way the government was designed was to have all three of those elements in it. So in our case, the legislative branch, the House, would be the democratic element, that we have representative democracy. The Senate, it's similar to an oligarchy. It's a small number of people. Not oligarchy, but I should say aristocracy, small number of people. The presidential, executive branch is akin to the monarchy. And as one deteriorates, the theory is the others will rise up to compensate for that. So you have a dynamic compensation system. So you end up with a corrupt executive branch. Then you have the legislative branch rising up to offset that, and then of course they added a judicial branch, which in a sense is akin to rule by the wise. But the judicial branch here is, of course, to protect the Constitution and the constitutional rights, and to interpret the Constitution. And it's sort of, in that sense, narrow. I think everybody would agree that we should be ruled by the wise and the honest. I think the problem is identifying them and figuring out who they are, and then preventing that from becoming corrupt, because people tend to hold on to power and keep power. A human weakness, I suppose. Even if we could identify who is, we still are faced with consent, the consent of some of the people, I suppose, deciding, yes, this person is honest, identifying them and saying, okay, well, we agree, we think this person is wise. So in that regard, you're still caught with a democratic element in that. Unless you want to trust to an outside institution, say an educational institution, to generate wise people and honest people. But how much faith can you put in constitutions? They also are subject to corruption and decay. So I don't know. Perhaps the answer is some tension between these things. A dynamic tension. But of course, the way the government is structured here is that dynamic tension too. Except, we always have to watch to make sure people are being wise and honest. Freedom. It makes me think of where we're not free. It makes me think of, the fact that we're limited. We're limited time and space, of course, limit us. We're chained to those. Of course, that's a nice, interesting delusion, because we actually view those as degrees of freedom. We view space as the freedom to move somewhere. We view time as time that we can do something with. Of course, we overburden it and overstructure it, and we end up chaining ourselves out of any time that freedom gives us. But in essence, those are limitations, but we mistake them for freedoms. Food, hunger, and thirst. Those are the two major limitations. The fascinating. It's also interesting that they also provide pleasure. I don't know whether that's an act of mercy or what, but it to me is the taking of life to perpetuate my own life is the greatest mystery and most problematic thing I can imagine. I mean, I understand that life has somehow solved the problem of perpetual motion, because none of us are immortal, but what life does is it eats itself, it consumes itself, and then generates a new generation, and then the old generation dies. So it's an incredibly clever solution to the problem of perpetual motion, you know. Still, and then, okay, so now we get into the luxury thing, you know. So we actually have, I think, some very basic, simple needs. We don't need much food to survive. We only need some water to survive. But what we do is we crave luxury, perhaps out of fear, is my current theory on this, you know. And then, so we want more than we need, you know. Then we create artificial hungers. In fact, we have whole industries dedicated to creating artificial hungers, and we chain ourselves. We chain ourselves to 1,000 artificial hunger. I mean, really, I would like to see society structured so the basic needs, basic food, water, shelter, that these are all met, that these are free for everyone. And then luxuries are things that people would pursue if they wish to waste their time pursuing them, you know. However, for some reason, with us, with humanity, we can't tell the difference at times. What is a luxury suddenly becomes a need. And I don't know whether that's because, in a sense, luxury is addictive. But the next thing you know, we perceive what is actually a luxury to be a need. And then we just keep raising the bar so that pretty soon, all these luxuries are the needs that we feel entitled to. And we have a distorted view of everything, you know. Innate nature. I'm not sure, you know. I somehow this question brushes up against the question of good and evil, the question of criminality, you know. I mean, on the one hand, I'd like to say, yeah, what's criminal is what is, you know, antisocial behavior. You know, on the other hand, it's like distorted, dysfunctional freedom. You know, freedom, individual freedom, should allow you to pursue what you wish to pursue without infringing upon the rights of others. Criminality, you pursue what you want to pursue at the expense of others. And the reason I say this touches upon good and evil is I think of serial killers. I think of Jeffrey Dahmer. You know, is that evil, or is that just a form of illness? How do we view that? How can that be viewed? But in any event, he certainly had some artificial hungers, or he took a natural hunger and perverted it into an artificial, strange hunger. Very curious. Thank you again for all those references. I like the idea, your image of us having to bridle ourselves. I mean, I think we're bridling our hungers and our desires for unnecessary luxuries, but that appetite and this insane thing we have, we do need to contain it. And I think principles, ethical principles, virtues, have us contain those things, help us contain those things. I am running out of time, man. I just don't have enough time. I do worry about oppression by the majority. A modified democracy is, I mean, just general mob rule. That, I don't view that as democracy, but I don't know. If you have rule by the mob, there's got to be a way to, well, I'm not going to have time to develop this thought or express it really, man, because I'm having to search for what I mean by it. one last thing here. I'm out of time. I'll talk to you quickly. Bye.